Hey everyone, this is Charlie, and you're watching The Burrow. Today what I want to talk to you about is getting experience if you're looking into being a freelance writer. I know that when I was starting out, it was really difficult for me because it seemed like one of those situations where so many people who were looking for freelance writers wanted people who already had experience, right? So it becomes one of those situations where it's like, okay, well, you need experience, but nobody's willing to give you a chance to get that experience, right? And that was really frustrating for me when I was first starting out, when I was just taking jobs in like SEO or editing or really anything to do with freelance writing work, right? So I want to give you guys just a couple of tips that you can use if you're just starting out and you want to write professionally every single day on things that aren't just your own novel or your own blog or whatever the case may be, in hopes of speeding along the process, making it less stressful for you so that you can start working as a writer full-time, hopefully a lot faster. Tip number one, and this is something I really want you to take to heart, is please do not write for free. I think one of the biggest traps people really fall into, particularly when they're starting out, and this is not just, there are these particularly newer companies do this, where they'll say something like, okay, come and write for us and we'll give you so much exposure, right? Which sounds like a really good idea because you can just be like, oh man, exposure. Like, I'll get my name out there and then that will lead to me getting more freelance work, right? But the problem is that going to put food on your table? And also, what kind of precedent are you setting for yourself and also for other writers, right? Like, nobody would ask an interior designer, for example, to basically to design a space for them and be like, okay, we'll just give you the exposure, right? Like, that's ridiculous. Don't accept just that as payment, because what are you going to do? Or how many of those jobs can you really afford to take if you're trying to make writing a living? The one time when this makes sense is when you're just writing for yourself, right? If you're starting a project with a friend or you're starting a new project by yourself, it makes, like, you have no choice, right, but to write for free for a little while. And actually, even if you're not starting a big new project, you're not trying to start a web magazine or a blog that has a lot of views, you're just, I think it's really important for you to not forget to write for yourself, because one of the problems, right, especially if you're just coming out of school or you're coming out of a degree where you don't really have any sort of writing portfolio that would help you sort of immediately get a writing job, is that if you can write at least for yourself, if you have a blog that is well written, and this is why I don't understand why writers keep personal blogs that are just so freaking sloppy. Like, keep the copy clean, right? Treat your work professionally, but yeah, write in your own space about things you're passionate about. It'll be good for you mentally. It's good writing practice. And when all else fails, if you don't have any what are you doing, Bug? You don't have any pieces from like another published work, say, that you can show an employer, you can still show them these writing samples, which is what I did actually when I got my first full-time writing job, and it worked out fine, right? But you have to have, basically you have to be willing to go out there and try and create your own opportunities, right? But this is the only case in which I would recommend that you work for free. So the third thing I want to talk about is your need for creative expression, right? As an artist, which is what you are as a writer, you are absolutely entitled to put yourself into your work, to put your own style on things. That's a lot of times why people will hire you, is because they like your voice, they like your style and all that stuff, right? But I have met so many writers and artists in general that are so, how should I say, adversarial when it comes to their own work. Not adversarial, precious, right? They're so precious about their own artistic integrity, so to speak. They're so precious about their own work that what ends up happening is they gain a reputation among employers, particularly if they're not working with online companies. If you're writing for actual, like, brick and mortar businesses, so to speak, writing their copy, writing their web content, whatever, you're going to develop this reputation that you aren't willing to compromise. And if it's a novel, right, if it's a blog, right, if it's something you have complete control over, then by all means, you know, sing all day about your artistic integrity and how much you value what you're trying to say and what you're trying to do. But the time for that is not when you are working for a client, right? When your client wants you to put out a piece of content about X story, right? Like, I can't tell you how many stories I've written about topics that I thought were just terrible. I've talked about them before, like you know, tips for meeting women. Like, I don't ever want to write about that, but at the end of the day, that's what your client is requesting. So if you want that food on your table and you want to get a reputation as a writer who is willing to work with a client until you're in a position where you no longer have to take those sort of moral or artistic compromises, then please do yourself a favor. Please do yourself a favor and just work. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is being adversarial towards other writers. Naturally, right, there is only so much work for writers in the freelance space, and this can be more or less true depending on what city you're working in, what part of the country or world you're living in, right? Where I was living before in Rochester, it's kind of like a very liberal, kind of artistic kind of town in many, many areas, and so there are a lot of writers there who can write as well, if not better, than me. So naturally there is sort of like this competitive atmosphere, right? Of course you are competing with other writers, but I really, really urge you not to take this sort of adversarial attitude when you meet other writers, right? I was arrogant enough in my younger days, and I know some other writers who, particularly before they had sort of gotten their stripes, so to speak, they were just these really sort of like, oh, you're a writer too, kind of like mentality, like, oh, I bet I write better than you, and sort of not saying that outwardly, but the attitude, right? And at the end of the day, if you make friends with writers, we make very, very good friends eventually, particularly the older ones when they've been through it a little bit and they can sort of understand your plight and all that jazz. But your number one way, I find, into some writing jobs is by building friendships and connections and demonstrating yourself as a great writer to other writers, because writers become editors, writers become publishers, writers become all these other things, right? And if you make a really good impression now and you network, right, like this isn't something necessarily unique to the writing profession, it will come back to be very, very valuable for you in the future and help you get more experience, or even if you've already had it, to get bigger jobs, right, where you can take some of that more artistically liberating jobs, which we were sort of talking about a little bit earlier. So that's it for me, guys. I'm going to do another couple of videos about freelance writing. It seems like a valuable thing for some of you out there. We're going to start out with getting some experience, what we talked about today, and then we're going to talk about dealing with clients, getting into those situations which we touched on today where it feels like your integrity is on the line, and some other things that I think are really important to working in freelance writing. So those will be coming out over the next couple weeks. If you have any questions about freelancing, any suggestions, if you've been doing it for a while, please of course let me know down in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you guys. But on that note, that's all for me today. Go write something awesome. Cheers.
I felt so much better. I felt so released from this pressure of trying to live up to this thing I held up on a pedestal since I was in my early teens. So eventually, working through that, I realized that what I really, really wanted deep down was to just be my own boss.